Hey, this is kind of a weird question, but what exactly do you hate about this game? I mean, just for, extra jokes, that kind of thing.
What exactly I hate? It's 10-2. You just hate everything about it. It's awful, it's stupid, it's idiotic. All of the characters are gibbering imbeciles, and none of them wear actual pants, especially the men, I think. Just nothing to say. It's just 10-2. Everyone knows it sucks. It's gonna be the easiest review we've ever done. We'll just get it done in 2 days and spend the rest of the week. Just, Shelby? Shelby, where are you going?
Listen to our story. We'll try to keep it under 25 minutes. I thought this would be the easiest review I've ever done. But then I started wondering, why exactly do I hate this game? I always reasoned that I hated it because it was completely stupid, but that doesn't make any sense. I usually like things that are completely stupid, like Shining Force Neo, Lady Gaga, and most cartoons put out by Hasbro. This isn't to be faulted by mindlessness alone. There's something else at work here. Something grossly offensive. And so began my quest to figure out what I and others find so detestable about Final Fantasy X-2. Looking at other reviews didn't really help me out on this one, since most people's beef is, from what I can tell, with the opening cutscene. No, seriously, go look up a negative review for Final Fantasy X-2 and try to find one that doesn't have something similar to this within the first few minutes.
A Final Fantasy sequel? Santa did get my Christmas list! How dare you!
I think the anchor toward the opening CGI in and of itself is a clumsy attempt that most make to disapprove of the new tone and direction the game took, especially in comparison to its predecessor. While Final Fantasy as a series doesn't go out of its way to be especially cynical or depressing, it is fairly serious and no-nonsense. And the previous game, Final Fantasy X, was the most somber entry to the series at the time. After all, this is the first time we've really seen the narrative of death and anxiety being played not as an existential quest, as is traditional, but more of a political—
Oi, hey, that's a long-winded love letter for another day.
Oh, I'm sorry. Without getting into too much detail, the story is basically about the people of an entire continent, Spira, trying to break out of a society ruled by the spiritual equivalent of a violent drug addiction. And admittedly, this was probably not the best choice of a game to make a sequel out of. Not only did it leave off with a colossal sense of finality, but 10's ending was a bummer. The last cutscene was pretty much you watching your party need to break all of their hard work for everyone else's good, the main character Tidus getting retconned out of existence, and your second protagonist Yuna needing to watch everything she ever built and loved pretty much disappear in front of her eyes, and then have to buck up and take care of rehabilitating an entire collapsed society while she's already still grieving. It's a cautiously optimistic ending, yes, but it's a little more than a spark and an overwhelming sense of loss and uncertainty. So after such a heavy ending, it's understandable how it can be a bit jarring when you put 10's ending and 10-2's beginning back to back.
Everyone has lost something precious. Everyone here has lost homes, dreams, and friends. Everybody? Now, sin is finally dead.
And though I know the world of real emotion has surrounded me, I won't give in to it now. I know that forward is the only way my heart will go. I hear your voice calling out to me. You'll never be alone. What can I do for you? What can I do for you? What can I do for you?
But that still doesn't explain why I hate this game. I don't hate the fact that they opened with a Europop disco concert, or that Yuna transformed on stage like a magical girl, or that giant LCD Max Rebos on the drums. It's a common trap to fall into geek criticism, to call some aesthetics inherently good or bad, especially when it conflicts with a popular established work, because nerds are never hard-assed about change or anything. But calling the peppy technopop feel bad just because it followed a melancholic work is as intellectually sound as saying that yellow is a bad color to use for your interface because the one you've previously established was blue! Really, I can see this choice actually working well, if there was any thought put into it. I can see Yuna's world being rebuilt as a backlash against the death-obsessed culture of its origin, if there was any thought put into it. I can see a plot observing the fine line between a society embracing self-motivation and optimism and one embracing vapidity and hedonism being really, really interesting, if there was any thought put into it. But in all fairness, there is something that rings false about this setup. It's hard to believe that we could have a big technologically advanced concert 2 years after the collapse of civilization that, up until this point, was as technologically advanced as the Japanese fantasy equivalent of the Middle Ages. Especially when they reveal the entire continent sphere has been embroiled in 2 back-to-back grand-scale civil wars since we left off. Wow, that national economy bounced back fast, huh? We totally have enough time, resources, and a stable middle class with disposable income to fund an impromptu concert. Still, the lead's a dead end. I'm back to the drawing board with my next clue, the plot. I hate the plot. Similar to the storytelling mastery of Lost Kingdoms 2, most of 10-2's story revolves around our new hot-pants-wearing Yuna dicking around somewhere in the vicinity where an actual story is taking place, mostly the socio-political restructuring of Spira. Not that said restructuring is anything interesting, if we're being totally honest, it's probably one of the most watery and boring threads of the story, which is saying something considering such as the only reasonable point why it should be continued! The continent is divided between 3 groups: the radical restructuring movement, ageistly named the Youth League, New Yevon, the remnants of the evil religion that caused all the trouble in the first game, now undergoing serious reform, of course, and the Machine faction, which is, I don't know, just led by a guy who's bro-friends with the other 2. Not that the other 2 parties have any grander stakes, since the Youth League was pretty much made to get New Yevon's goat, and New Yevon is pretty reasonable after it goes under new management, which happens right after the first chapter. Can't have that rising action getting in the way of our digging mini-games, am I right? The Youth League is ruled by this jerk-off Nooj, who may have the worst design of any Final Fantasy character ever. Yes, even considering the rest of the competition. He's just some nihilistic asshole who wants to die, but can't for some reason. So he prolongs conflict and gets into all these fights for hope that someone knocks him off, or he gets into a situation where he can do it himself. Because who doesn't love characters like that, right? But despite the Youth League having no real direction and doing awful things, like attempting to burn a temple full of priests and the surrounding forest to the ground after they trap them all inside, the game implies that you're supposed to side with them in the conflict, going so far as to auto-deny you 100% completion on your first playthrough if you side with New Yevon, despite New Yevon being ruled by Barrel-Eye, one of the few characters in this game I can actually stand.
I understand if your feelings toward Yevon are mixed, but I would hope that you could put that aside and join our cause.
So why are we supposed to side against New Yevon according to this game? Well, the eventual reveal is that the terrible, unforgivable sin that New Yevon committed is hiding the existence of this. Its name is Vegnagun, and it's some remnant of awful technology from the war that blew up the planet 1,000 years ago, and the Church refuses to reveal information about it to the public until they find a way to properly disarm it. Because not only is this thing 6 stories tall and looks like Shaitan, but it's an empathetic weapon programmed to react whenever someone approaches it with negative feelings. It's a nuclear bomb built to go off whenever someone gets mad at it! And Nooj's stupid Boy Scout squad is butthurt because Barrel-Eye is trying to let information of it not get out to the public so everyone could just walk in and let their kids climb all over it. How dare he! I feel like here's where I start to get to the root of my hatred, the gross oversimplification of a chaotic world. In place of an actual story, the big issues are watered down to things that are solved way too quickly. The Albed, who are oppressed for using machines, a practice deemed sinful and dangerous in the prequel, are now the faultless god race that face no lingering racism or cultural differences that need adapting to or anything. Meanwhile, you can casually incite the genocide of another super devout race, the Guado, and get some really nice shag for it. All the big gray issues of the previous game are presented as black and white choices so we can have a forcibly oversimplified conflict. The lack of weight of all these great political issues doesn't seem to enhance the lighthearted aesthetic, it just makes everything feel really lazy. But even venting out all the wrongs of 10-2's story, my rage is not yet quelled. Besides, it's not like the irreverent story and forced vapidity is completely awful. In fact, it's exactly this field that gave us one of the best lost bad guys in the entire Final Fantasy franchise.
LeBlanc! Remember that name well, love.
Ah, the thief.
Whatever do you mean?
Ugh, that's what I hate about amateurs.
No, dude, I'm dead serious. LeBlanc is the bomb. Sure, her design is a bit of an eyesore, but she's probably the only genuinely enjoyable character the game has created. She's the closest unit her friends get to an antagonist for the first third of the game, but she's more of a borderline incompetent rival more than anything else. But don't let that fool you. LeBlanc is one classy dame. She even fits the supposed campy feminist message better than the rest of the cast.
And I never was the wait like a good girl type, isn't that right, Nooj?
Heck, after she steals the identity of one of the most high-profile political figures in the world, she just uses her infinite power of the masses to jumpstart her musical career. And after Yuna tells her to give it back, she does, but then just challenges Yuna to a fair fight for it. Sophisticated as hell, man. If I was being totally honest, I sometimes like to pretend LeBlanc is Tentu's version of Marauder Shields. Like she's trying to tell us that if we can't handle this, we won't be able to handle the rest of the game. And it seems like it worked, by the looks of things.
How dare you?
But as to be expected, since she's designed to be an overlooked, not to be taken seriously villain in a game a lot of people hate, hers is not a strong presence in the fandom, which is a damn shame. She may not be a true, threateningly tragic villain like Sephiroth or Jecht or what have you, but I can think of no better Final Fantasy antagonist to dedicate a whole mini-game for the express purpose of giving her an orgasm.
The boss fell asleep again. One massage and she's out like a light.
Not that there aren't plenty of fans out there who'd want to do the same for the previous two, I'm sure. And then I come to a revelation. I want to talk about the resident goofball more than I want to talk about our three main characters. And with this, I have the last clue, the characterization of our main characters, namely that of our central protagonist, Yuna. And with this comes a question that everyone is vaguely aware of when they approach this game, but nobody really likes to bring up. If it's not about the opening cutscene, this is the issue that inevitably still floats around, though not nearly so outspokenly. Ten-2 was Square's first attempt at an all-female party, and the choice of battle mechanics was for them to basically dress up in different outfits for whatever battle situations called for. And what outfits they are. Even I find this initial controversy to be a bit overblown, but when all's said and done, it's really hard to find a rock-solid counter to accusations of objectification when you're spending half of your processing power rendering your female protagonists doing modeling gigs in the heat of battle. But I still take this argument with a grain of salt, because one, I don't quite remember the same heat being thrown down on Fran and Ash in the next console installment. The worst complaint I've seen is that Ash's skirt is pink, not that it's showing ass cheek in the official art. And two, I feel like it's really easy to call objectification foul when you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who legitimately finds these outfits sexy. The guy who designed them was actually in charge of the monster designs in the prequels, so yeah. This is a phenomenon I like to call selective egalitarianism. It's when critics tend to use bad representations or damaging portrayals of minorities as just dressing to either multiply or penalize positive or negative points against the work. Put it to you this way, we'll be happy to point out racism, sexism, and other terrible social messages in works we critically consider to suck, since it adds a good sting against one's litany of the story. But equal measures of this tend to be excused or outright ignored in other works more critically well received. We so hail Bruce Timm's work in Batman the Animated Series, we don't hold it against him that he can't design a woman who isn't a horny bisexual with the same pouty face, hourglass figure, and breasts so perky they look like their nipples are chained to the ceiling. And hey, yeah, you know, that's really something that goes both ways, because when I see positive reviews of Final Fantasy X-2, you'd be hard-pressed to find at least one backhanded comment saying that Yuna is somehow more badass or self-motivated than her Final Fantasy X counterpart.
And I disagree with that wholesale, if only because Final Fantasy X is the most explicit feminist message in any video game ever.
Really?
Yeah, totally. Think about it. In 10, Yuna has the same heroic resolve of her companions, if not more so, but she channels it into socially acceptable ways, namely to become a summoner and embark on a pilgrimage to save the world, despite the disproportionate sacrifice she'd have to pay. But that doesn't mean she's letting people push her around. The only reason she does this is because she believes the Order of the Land is the best way to incite change and save her people. As she continues her journey, she learns more of the real torment and anguish her system has caused people, and her actions become slowly more defiant and willful. This comes to a head at the end, where she more or less tells the figurehead of society, "The only reason I did anything I did was because I thought you and your rules had the best interests of everyone and myself at heart, and now that I see that such is not true, we're done." And the story ends with our male and female protagonists making the final stand as complete emotional equals, both making massive personal sacrifices in order to do the right thing. If that's not a feminist narrative, I don't know what is.
Wow, you're right. What does this mean? Did Square Enix go out to create a watershed moment for gender equality in video games?
Nah, hell nah. This is the same team that made Renoa. And Fran. And Tifa's boob-jiggling victory pose. And this. And this from the same game. And this from the same game.
Guess everyone was right, and feminism and video games don't go together. Well, guess I could scratch that idea down the toilet. Well, I don't think that makes it any less of a valid interpretation.
Hey, really?
Yeah, think about it. Just as so many unfair stereotypes and audience alienation comes from bad writing rather than onus towards groups of people, I find the reverse to be true as well. Good, honest writing that tries to make all of its characters human tends to create good cultural messages, regardless of explicit writing intent.
What are you gonna do with your life?
I'm going to get what I want.
It's one of the reasons we can, and by all rights ought to, study great art and literature of yore and apply it to our own modern prose. But we've gotten into a bad habit of thinking there's no way a woman can be belittled and disenfranchised if she has a gun in her hands, even though Yuna is. A lot.
Oh,
For a reason that's completely lost on me, Yuna seems to be rebelling against her old self, even though she already did that in the first game. But unlike 10, there doesn't seem to be any reason for her to want to do so. She just seems to be the same good, altruistic person she was in the first game, but from what I can tell, she wants to put on a facade of a spunky, selfish, fun-loving thief because her friends are bullying her to do so. And the Gullwings are still technically led by Brother, even though he's nothing but a sociopath man-child who tries to cop a feel on Yuna when he gets the chance. Even though he's technically related to her. Of course, that doesn't stop Riku from trying to get her hands on Yuna's goods, because that's sexy and not incestuous sexual abuse. Seriously, through most of the story, her friends are constantly pestering her for being a doormat and warning her to not let herself get used again, even though she wasn't a doormat and she didn't let herself get used. Hell, she used them. She took all the summons she stocked up during her pilgrimage and used them to blow up the big bad, and even when she wants to earnestly help someone because it's the right thing to do, her dick cousin or her dick friend get on her case and are all like, "Oh, aren't you being a stuffy goody-goody now, huh, Uni?" It's even kind of implied that Riku pretty much emotionally blackmailed her to start her journey in the first place by dangling a remnant of her disappeared boyfriend in front of her face and goading her on to learn more. Even in a meta way, Yuna's wants are trivialized. The reason this game was made was that the costume designer said, "Dude, I'm having so much fun dressing up Yuna, I bet everyone would have just as much fun." Even the designers were less focused on what Yuna's motivations were as a character and more focused on what they thought would be best or most fun for her to do. Treating your own character as disposable and negligible is already bad enough, but when you staunchly refuse to take any of your protagonists seriously, the story suffers. Riku was already kind of an idiot and a fan service factor in the first game, so no net change there, but I was seriously expecting something from Pain and her huffy, whiny, mopey attitude. But my wish for head and depth fill in deaf ears, because the great thing that ties her to the story is that she was the camera woman to the antics of her bro-friend faction leaders. Yes, that is Pain's mysterious backstory. She's a stenographer. And that's it. And Yuna's ultimate driving justification to her to even stay involved in the plot is that she got a photograph of somebody who looks like her disappeared boyfriend. Also, when I say the whole plot is resolved by Nooj, Barreleye, and Gipple, I mean it. The majority of the ending cutscene is just them getting together around a microphone and assuring the audience that everything's been taken care of, with a speech as well scripted and charismatic as 90% of amateur YouTube commentators. You have to get 100% completion just so Yuna can have the majority of the screen time of the last cutscene of her own goddamn game. And even that is just so she can serve as the vessel to get Tidus back into the franchise. Hey, wait, if you count LeBlanc, she's not even the opening cutscene of her own goddamn game. So what the hell? So bearing all this in mind, let's get back to our first question. Is the dress sphere system sexist? Certainly something like that went into its design, yes. Is the implication that the entirety of the world's political power will be restructured by 3 best dude friends with no help from anyone else, especially any sort of powerful female force? Certainly, but that's definitely not the main problem. The really damaging sexist message, and the fatal flaw of the game, is that it deems the characterization of its female protagonist as completely negligible. Yuna's presence and her role in the canon of the world, despite the tremendous importance it's been established to be, is pushed to be little more than an artifact, both in and out of universe. Her entire personality has demeaned to be a little more than a doll, sometimes literally, and regarded as having no weight and no right or obligation to treat such with respect. The team forced a character not to be herself, kept her and her friends as irrelevant, shallow, and divorced from their own stories as much as they possibly could, tried to convince the audience it was for the best, and sincerely expected they'd be able to make a continuation of an ambitious story as well as a worthy, self-contained game with all of this being held accounted for. They couldn't. We don't bring these things up to slander Square Enix, we do it because we call out all bad, lazy writing. It's our job. And like all lazy and terrible writing, these messages have a negative impact on the overall story. We need to treat these things as they are. Flaws, not black marks on a creator's character. Sometimes they are, but that's an extreme example. And bringing up hot button issues will cause controversy, and it will lose you followers, and it will get a lot of people upset. But we can't completely review the pros and cons of a work if we're holding back on big issues that permeate all of them, at least to some extent. If we can't nip these things in the bud, we're doomed to repeat our mistakes. We managed to stop in X-3, but we may not be so lucky next time. I'm Shelby, and I have to go to work.
It would be so easy to let my fate just carry me away, following the same path my whole life through. But I know I can't. What I do with no regrets.
Yuna, don't let him push you around.
I'll poop.